With such a balanced roster this upcoming season, the Kentucky Wildcats will probably have a number of players in double-digit figures night in and night out. But who could lead the Kentucky Wildcats in scoring this season? I think it's somebody that is kind of sitting under the radar.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be asking and answering the question, who will lead Kentucky basketball in scoring this upcoming season? I'm going to give you 4 different players that I believe could lead the Cats in scoring, and I'm going to give you my take on who out of those 4 I believe it will be. It's somebody I think, based on how they were utilized last year, I think is kind of under the radar this upcoming season. Also on today's episode, we're going to take a look at a bold prediction here from a listener about how Kentucky will utilize the three-point shot. Could they break an all-time record this season? Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the show. And if you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Who could possibly lead the Kentucky Wildcats in scoring this upcoming season? If you've been watching the show recently, you've seen me talk a lot about Kentucky's roster, which is primarily composed of transfer portal players, and how they were utilized at their previous schools. We've talked a lot about how guys shot the ball, how many times they were able to shoot the ball, how often they were used on various possessions, and we put together a Google Sheets document that we went over just a few weeks ago, and we looked at every single transfer portal player and kind of what they did at their previous school or schools. And we came to the conclusion that it's a very balanced roster from top to bottom. A lot of different players kind of hovering statistically in the same spots. Now, there are a couple of outliers, especially when it comes to amount of possessions used. And I think you're going to see, with the way that Kentucky has structured their roster this season, you're going to see those outliers, those numbers kind of hit the average here across the board for the Wildcats this season with Mark Pope. I think Kentucky is structured one of the most balanced rotations in all of college basketball this upcoming season. Do they have a star player? Not necessarily. I think you could make that argument for Jaxson Robinson, but on the whole, they don't really have a player that stands out relative to their peers, and I think that that can be a good thing. It can also be a bad thing. I think that we're going to have to see this team actually play against some good competition to really feel out whether or not that matters. What does matter, I think, is experience with the Wildcats. They're going to be one of the deepest and most experienced teams in the nation this season. But it does beg the question, with so many different players that were so similar statistically a season ago as far as points per game, rebounds, assists, it does ask the question, who is going to lead the Kentucky Wildcats in scoring? So we've got 4 different options here today, and I want to start with the player I mentioned just a second ago, the player that could potentially be Kentucky's star this upcoming season, and that is Jaxson Robinson. Jaxson Robinson came off the bench for BYU a season ago, but still led the team in scoring. And keep in mind, this was a team that led the Big 12 in scoring just a season ago, a hair over 80 points per contest. Jaxson, though, 14.2 points per game while shooting 43% from the floor, 35.5% from beyond the arc. Those are efficiency-wise, those are numbers that don't really stand out relative to some other players on this roster, and that's kind of funny to say, and it really does show you what Mark Pope and the staff prioritized in the transfer portal, which was shooting and balanced scoring. But I think Jaxson Robinson, the case for Jaxson Robinson to lead Kentucky in scoring this upcoming season is that he did it a season ago for Mark Pope, and he's going to be in line to play just as many minutes, if not more, this season. I think also when you look at Kentucky's roster, the need for an all-around scorer to step up on a roster full of catch-and-shoot guys is important. And Robinson, obviously, a very good catch-and-shoot player in his own right, but he can do a little bit of everything as far as scoring at the rim, scoring in the mid-range, shooting from beyond the arc. Obviously, we know that. He's a very confident shot taker. He can also be utilized in a variety of ways off the ball when it comes to cutting to the rim, when it comes to slashing. I think he does a little bit of everything. So an all-around scorer in Jaxson Robinson, who led BYU a season ago, I think it makes sense for him to kind of be at the top of the list here when you talk about the candidates that could lead Kentucky in points per game. Jaxson Robinson, somebody that I think a lot of people would say is going to be the guy. But I think it's going to be somebody else, and we'll continue down the list here. Let's look at a player that played very well, I think, at another school in the Big 12 last season and could be primed for a breakout season, and that's Otega Oweh. He was second on the team, or he's second on this year's team in terms of possessions used. He was utilized on 23.8% of possessions a season ago. The player that was most utilized, actually, is Amari Williams at a little over 31%. Again, I think Williams will be utilized just a little bit less. I think players like Oweh will probably stay around that usage rate. And I think that could aid here when making the case for what he could be doing for the Wildcats this year. If you want to take a look at his stats from a season ago at Oklahoma, he really did blossom into a well-rounded player in his sophomore season with the Sooners. 11.4 points per game, shooting 49.3% from the floor, 37.7% from beyond the arc, and that's really solid efficiency for a 6'5 guard / wing. Again, he was utilized, I think, quite a bit a season ago at Oklahoma. I think he's going to be a major contributor for the Wildcats this season. Does he end up starting at that wing position? Does Robinson end up coming off the bench and Andrew Carr playing at the 4? Does Otega start at the 2 potentially for Kentucky? I'm not quite sure how Kentucky's going to utilize him, but he has the potential to come out on top of a roster that is extremely imbalanced and at the end of the day may end up being more so than we expect just from a points per game perspective. Again, he's a pretty efficient player, all things considered, and he could be in for a breakout year. Almost 50% from the floor and almost 38% from 3 is nothing to scoff at 11 points per game. He could take another jump in a high-flying three-point shooting system. I've got faith in Otega stepping up and being a really solid player on both sides of the ball for the Wildcats this season. Let's talk about 2 more players that I think are kind of flying under the radar, and then the final player I truly do believe, as of this moment, would be the dark horse, I think, for Kentucky to lead Kentucky in points per game. And it's a very interesting reason why I think he will lead the Cats in that category. Before we dive into that, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. I have absolutely loved the Atlanta Braves games that I've been going to this summer. It has been incredible to go see Truist Park and get to see the Braves kind of match up against a bunch of different really good opponents. Obviously, their series against the Phillies this past weekend was super, super fun. I know a few friends that went. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go, but I will be able to go see the Braves again soon thanks to Game Time, because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier, and prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and then views from your seat, and then their lowest price guarantee. On top of that, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Every single person that I know that wants to go to a Major League Baseball game, whether it be fans of the Reds, whether it be fans of the Marlins — I've got some friends that are Marlins fans, believe it or not, and I've got a lot of Braves fans as well — every single person utilizes Game Time. It is the place to go to get your tickets. You can get them all the way up to the start of the event, and sometimes even after the event starts. It's super easy, super quick to use. I also loved using Game Time last year during college football season, and I cannot wait to use them again this fall. You can take the guesswork out of buying your MLB tickets with Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, continuing along here on the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Really appreciate you guys checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. Let's go ahead and continue our conversation here. Who will lead the Kentucky Wildcats in scoring this upcoming season? We've given you two pretty solid options in Jaxson Robinson and Otega Oweh. We've made our case for both. Let's continue here with a power forward from Wake Forest that I think will be heavily involved with Kentucky's game plan this upcoming season, and that is Andrew Carr. In case you don't know, Andrew Carr started his career out with Delaware. He spent 2 years there, starting in 2020, averaged 8.2 points and then 10 points per game before transferring to the Wake Forest Demon Deacons down in Winston-Salem. 10.7 points per game while shooting 31% from beyond the arc in his first season with the Demon Deacons. And then last year, as a senior, 13.5 points per game, shot 52.6% from the floor, 37.1% from three, while averaging almost three-point attempts per game. He was a very solid option for the Deacs a season ago for a pretty good team that probably should have made the NCAA tournament, in my opinion. If I'm not mistaken, they just barely missed it, had things fall apart there towards the end of the season. But it was a good offensive team nonetheless, and Andrew Carr was a major part of that. With this year's team, in Mark Pope's system, I think he's going to have the opportunity to do two things. He's going to have the opportunity to take some outside shots to continue to prove that he is a good catch-and-shoot player. But he's also going to have an opportunity to play alongside some other players with more gravity, so to speak. And I put that in air quotes because I want to explain here to you what more gravity kind of means. Obviously, we've talked about this term when discussing different high school prospects over the last several weeks. We look at guys that are dominant ball handlers, right? Players that are a threat to score at every single level and are going to be guys that are handling the ball on a large amount of possessions. So naturally, the defense pays more attention to them, will sometimes double, will sometimes just naturally gravitate more towards that player because of how often they are utilized trying to score. Kentucky's going to have a lot of different players that will be able to touch the ball and make something happen. Robinson, Brea, Butler, Carissa, they're going to have a lot of different guys that will go out there and make things happen. And so naturally, I think defenses will be more inclined to give more attention. Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison down low are two more really solid examples. Andrew Carr last season at Wake Forest was a really solid option cutting to the basket. He was definitely somebody that was utilized a lot in the dunker spot and then somebody that could be on the receiving end of a pass after a cut for an easy layup or just a two in general. Carr, I think, benefits this season from playing around a bunch of different guys that will get more attention, at least I think. And so that could lead to either easier scoring opportunities or just more scoring opportunities in general. Again, for a guy that averaged almost 14 a game a season ago. And may I remind you, Jaxson Robinson led BYU, who averaged over 80 points a game, in scoring while barely scoring 14 a game on his own last season. So Pope likes to run balanced rotations. If Andrew Carr is able to get out there and be as involved as I believe he could be, and he's on the receiving end of a lot of different passes from guys like Williams or Carissa or Butler or whoever it may be, I think that Andrew Carr, you can definitely make the case that he could lead the team in points per game. So that's three players there that could lead the team in PPG, but I want to talk about the player that I believe right now will lead the Kentucky Wildcats in scoring. It is a player that I frankly don't believe was utilized enough at his previous school, and he was actually utilized a decent amount, but because he had some players around him that were extremely efficient, particularly down low, he didn't get a ton of opportunities to really do much other than shoot threes, which he's going to get an opportunity to do a ton of this season. Koby Brea transferred in from Dayton as, numbers-wise, the best shooter in America. He averaged almost 7.5 shots per game last year, and frankly, I think should have averaged more because when you look at his efficiency, it is truly insane what the 6'6" sharpshooter was able to do. 11 points per game while shooting 51% from the floor, 49.8% from three, while averaging 6 3-pointers per game. He needs to be utilized more. Antonio Reeves last season shot almost 14 shots per game. He averaged 20 points per game. Koby Brea averaged 7.5 shots per game. If you double Koby Brea's shot attempts and you take down his efficiency from 49.8% from beyond the arc, if you clip it 5 to 7%, you're still looking at one of the nation's best shooters, on par with what Antonio Reeves did a season ago, as far as just efficiency-wise, not necessarily in style of play, but as far as efficiency. You could very well be looking at somebody that averages 17, 18, 19 points per game, and he's going to be in a system that encourages a lot of high-octane outside shooting. I want to remind you guys, we talked about this on a recent episode, Dayton was one of the slowest teams in the country last year. Now, they did take threes. They took a lot of threes, but they could have taken more, and they could have won more games because of that. We talked about that on a recent episode, a deep dive, where just a couple of threes per game more, and you're looking at winning essentially every single game of the regular season if you're the Flyers. Guys like Koby Brea should have been looked at more, and he was looked at quite a bit. In fact, he made over 100 threes last year. But it's funny, he could have been more. Dayton could have done more with their three-point shooters, and they had some really, really good guys, not just Brea. It's the same thing with Kentucky this season. They've got a number of really good three-point shooters, but Brea's the best. And at the end of the day, I hate to kind of oversimplify things, but if you've got a really good shooter that can maintain that efficiency at a high volume, give him more shots. More shots mean more points. More points mean a better opportunity to win the game. Team with the most points at the end of the day wins. So give guys like Koby Brea 4, 5, 6 more shots per game with more tempo and just more opportunities in general. He's going to be looked at more because of the system that Mark Pope wants to run. There's not a Deron Holmes who is going to be demanding attention every single possession down low, albeit, although I should say Amari Williams will be able to get his own. Guys like Koby Brea, I think if you bump up their volume and take their efficiency down even just like a fair amount, he's still going to be in major contention to lead this team in points per game, which is why I currently believe that he will. I think that he will take more shots. I think that he won't be able to shoot at a 50% clip from beyond the arc, but even if it's 42, 43%, he's going to be right up there. I think Koby Brea right now will lead this team in points per game. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think Koby Brea will lead the team in points per game? Do you think it will be Jaxson Robinson, Otega, Andrew Carr, Amari Williams, somebody else on this roster? Let me know in the YouTube comments below. At LockedOnUK on Twitter is where you can find me if you want to give that answer. I actually put up a graphic there over on Instagram and on Twitter. You can actually leave your vote in a poll if you want to go share your thoughts there. All right, I want to wrap up the show talking about a bold prediction from a listener that is actually pretty possible. Now, it is bold at the same time, but I think the Wildcats could be right there this season when it comes to maybe breaking an all-time record in college basketball. Before we dive into that, though, I want to remind you guys, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed wherever you are tuned in, I would really, really appreciate it if you guys did that. Thank you so much to everybody who has subscribed, who's been commenting, sharing their thoughts. Thank you to everyone who has shared a bold prediction. If you have a bold prediction you want to drop in the comments below, you can absolutely do that, trying to get to every single one before the season starts. And I want to ask you guys, again, who do you think is going to lead the team in scoring? If you want to have more conversations with myself and other fans of Big Blue Nation, you can actually go check out my Twitter at @LanceDawe_. It's right here on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. And you can go to the pinned link at the top of my profile and join the Locked On Kentucky Discord. It's free. It's a place for all of us to chat, not just about Kentucky basketball, but Kentucky football, Kentucky baseball, anything going on with Big Blue Nation. It's going to be there. Again, it's free at @LanceDawe_, pinned link at the top of my profile if you want to go check that out. All right, wrapping up the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Really appreciate you guys checking out the show. Let's get to a bold prediction here from a listener about Kentucky and the three-point line this upcoming season. According to Grobby10, and that is his username over on our Discord, he said this year's team will set the NCAA single-season record for threes made. I love this prediction, and I decided to do a little bit of digging to figure out kind of what Kentucky needs to do in order to make this possible, because if you look at some of the numbers, and if Kentucky is, going to stick to what they're saying this offseason, this is a very possible thing. The current holder of the all-time single-season three-point record are the 2017-18 Villanova Wildcats. They hold the all-time record with 464 threes. That is 11.6 made per game. 29 three-pointers attempted per contest. For context, Kentucky's team a season ago, that was one of the best offenses of the nation and really liked the three-point shot more so than previous Calipari teams. They only averaged 9.9 three-pointers attempted per game, not even made. Villanova made 11.6. Kentucky last year only averaged 9.9 attempted per game on 40.9% efficiency. Villanova shot 40.1% from beyond the arc. Last season, BYU shot 11.1 three-pointers per game, and assistant coach Cody Fugger, I believe it's Fugger. I may be butchering his last name, but they want to take 35 three-pointers per game. Last year, I believe BYU took 32. They want to take 35 three-pointers per game this season. We talked about this on a recent episode about how aggressive Kentucky's going to be and how they could end up being the best offense in the nation. They're putting themselves in a really good position with this year's roster to make the case for best offense in the country. And I think, honestly, they could get very close, if not break this record. Last season, again, BYU, 11.1 three-pointers per game. So let's look at Kentucky and their aspirations this year. Okay, let's just say for a second that Kentucky does end up shooting 35 three-pointers per game, which is a lot. It would have led the nation last year. If Kentucky plays 33 games this season, 31 games in the regular season, 1 game in the SEC tournament, and 1 game in the NCAA tournament, if they get bounced in their first game, the postseason, both the conference tournament and the NCAA, 33 games, while shooting 35 three-pointers like they want to, they'll need to shoot the rock at a 40.2% clip to get 465 threes to break that all-time record. 40.2%, I think, is difficult. I think that's a difficult mark to get to. Why? Well, look at what BYU did a season ago. The Cougars only shot 35.4% from beyond the arc, if I'm not mistaken, and that, I don't think, is necessarily bad. Obviously, it's above average. They shot 34.8%. I'm thinking of Jaxson Robinson's number from earlier. 34.8%. It's not bad. It's just barely above average. Now, you need to have the conversation, obviously. Well, BYU had different personnel a season ago. They had some front court guys that weren't really great at making threes. Kentucky has brought in a bunch of different players from the 4 up that can really shoot the rock, especially in catch-and-shoot situations, which Kentucky's going to set up a lot of guys for this upcoming season with guys like Butler and Carissa running the offense. And I think that you could make the conversation about personnel. But I think Kentucky, as far as their averages go, when you add up all these transfer portal players, they shot 39.4% from beyond the arc collectively. These transfers from a season ago, 424 three-pointers made among all of Kentucky's transfers that they brought in, right? 39.4%. I think Kentucky's going to be a little less than that this upcoming season. I think they'll hover between 37 and 39%. That's just my guess. But if Kentucky really does want to break this all-time record, while shooting somewhere between 37 and 39%, which is really where I think these transfers are going to be at. Plus guys like Colin Chandler, Trent Noah, Travis Perry as well, if you want to throw those guys in there. I think that they'll have to do 2 things. Number one, obviously, I think they got to win in the postseason. They've got to be able to get more games so that they can take more threes to get closer to this 464 three-pointer mark. I think they're also going to have to continue to take a ton of threes. If the coaching staff is saying what they're saying and they want to act upon it, 35 threes a game, if that ends up being true, they're going to have a little bit of an easier time trying to break this record, even if they are just above average efficiency and not like crazy elite efficiency, right? They're going to have an opportunity to do that. Do they end up taking 35 threes a game? That's the ambition. That's the goal. I don't know if they're going to, because BYU played very fast a season ago, and they shot a ton of threes. They also didn't shoot at a particularly high clip, again, like I mentioned a second ago. So maybe this just does come down to efficiency. Maybe it just does come down to, can you get guys like Jaxson Robinson to shoot better from beyond the arc? Can you get guys like Otega Oweh, Andrew Carr, Koby Brea, Carr? Can you get those guys to either maintain their efficiency from their previous school or get them to up it just a little bit? Guys like Lamont Butler, if he's going to be starting at point guard, he's going to be taking some shots too. He's going to have to get his 32% three-point shot up. He's going to have to get that number up. This is possible. This is very possible for Kentucky, but they've got to stick to what they're saying about their volume. They've got to be able to get to some games in March, get some more games in March, I should say. And they're going to have guys maintain their efficiency, their really good efficiency from a season ago, or step up. It's doable, and I love this prediction. This may be my favorite one that we've talked about so far. On a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of boldness, I would say this one is probably a 7. This is the lowest I think we've gone so far on the boldness scale, but this is probably, again, my favorite. This one's really, really fun to talk and speculate about. I want to ask you guys, what do you think? What do you think Kentucky's going to do? Will they break this all-time record? Do they even have a chance? You can leave it in the YouTube comments below. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.